Hello, friends. I am upset. The M plus
I like how the title is just I am upset.
class balance in patch 10.15 sucks. My team, as you may know, we pretty much only play our mains, even if they're not meta. Now, people have been saying, and you might say, but Crit, there's always a meta. Stop complaining. But the thing is, the meta has never been this far ahead of non-meta before. And my team, we always accept being 1, maybe 2 key levels below them, the top teams and the meta. But in 10.15, it's not just 1 or 2 key levels, it's more like 3 or even 4 sometimes. It's just insane how far ahead the meta comp is right now. I mean, just look at this. The stats speak for themselves. Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Fire Mage, Shadow Priest, and Augmentation Evokers are absolutely dominating the rankings right now. Everyone's playing them. They're just so far ahead. It just isn't a fair game anymore. If you want to push the highest keys, you just can't compete unless you're playing the meta comp or somehow sneaking into the meta comp with a different class. So now, many players are pretty much in the position where they have to decide if they want to keep playing their class and play at a major disadvantage, or they can say, screw it, I can't beat them, and join.
No one complains about the meta when it's their tunes doing well, though. I hear this argument so many times. Why don't you say that Moonkin is OP when it's OP? People say this without actually knowing. Like, do you know if Critcake talks about Warrior being OP if it's OP? Do you know that for a fact? Because most people just make this argument up. Most people just say, oh, they're not complaining when their own class is OP. But they might. Like, if Moonkin is OP, I say it's OP. People constantly accuse me of only talking about OP comps when I'm not part of it, which is not true. If I was part of this, like, Exodia comp, I would say it's OP. Like, I don't understand why you were, like, basically making up an argument.
Joining them. Or they can just take a break until Blizzard fixes class balance again, somewhat. And well, it's probably not a bad idea right now, to be honest. The sad thing really for me is that the class balance in Dragonflight was actually really good until 10.15. We saw many different comps being played in Season 1, and even in Season 2, before 10.15, it was pretty damn good. Yes, Shadow Priest was and still is an outlier, but that's just one spec rather than 5. And also, going into this patch, my team was well over the cutoff. I think we were about 150 score above the title cutoff. And after the patch, it's not looking like we're gonna get the title actually on our mains at all. The cutoff is just rising so fast after the patch, to the point where, yeah, we're not gonna get the title, most likely.
That's crazy. The score went up 220 points. Like,
we actually tried to keep playing our mains as usual
interesting.
the last couple of weeks, but even with clean runs, we are hitting a DPS and or a survivability wall at plus 27 keys. Something my team found
Thanks for
really
Prime
depressing,
Glunks,
or
what's
at least
up?
something I found depressing, was a plus 27 freehold that we attempted. It was a relatively clean run. We had maybe 3 deaths or so going into the last boss, but we also only had 2 minutes left going into the last boss, so we didn't have enough time, and we ended up depleting by 2 minutes, and that was with a clean run. Meanwhile, people are timing plus 29s. Yes, they are really good players, but there shouldn't be such a big difference between them and our non-meta comp. And even on the TGP, they have been timing plus 30s, and that's after nerfs to this god comp. So yeah, that's pretty much when we came to the realization that we can't keep up with our mains. So we have reluctantly made meta alts to level and gear up. Alpha, the Vengeance Demon Hunter, he's gone Guardian Druid. Curva has gone from Ret to Holy Paladin. Laren has gone from Resto Shaman to Shadow Priest. Varug has gone from Rogue to Augmentation Evoker. And I've gone from Warrior to Fire Mage. And I'm not even going to talk about the other classes. I'll just talk about my change here. Fire Mages, they just deal insane damage. Nobody can match their AoE. They seemingly have infinite defensives, mobility, and utility as well. It's just crazy. how good their kit is for M+, going from warrior to mage. And I've only played this mage for 4 days at this point. Yesterday, I was 4-3-7. I still don't really know how to play this class. And already...
The thing he's not thinking about regarding mage is that it's getting buffed by PI and AUG. So are other classes. Let's assume that mage benefits far more than PI and AUG, which is not true. But let's just assume that's true. Then that's still a problem, right? Then you have to nerf mage to not get as much benefit from those buffs, right? That can be changed. You can nerf a class to not benefit so much from certain buffs if they're the only ones that get like a lot of damage from them, right? You can change that.
Now, this mage is matching my 4-4-7 DPS warrior in overall DPS in M+. I don't understand how this can be a thing. I have so much experience on this warrior versus basically a noob mage at 4-3-7. And I probably would get beaten on my main warrior against this mage. It doesn't make sense. I also want to talk about the TGP. This whole thing really has put a serious dampener on my excitement for the TGP. Because before 10.15, I know for a fact that many teams were preparing a DPS warrior for certain keys for TGP. So we were probably going to see DPS warriors, and we were going to see variety in team comps, but now it's just the 5 meta specs, the Exodia Gaunt comp.
Don't forget about the Handsmith Shaman.
That is why I'm upset, and that's the end of my rant. I hope that Blizzard can fix this somewhat soon, and I'm aware that I belong in a sort of a small group of the player base. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you agree, disagree, or have you got something to add? If so, please put a comment below, and thank you for watching.
This whole video is just about what I guess we as a high-end community already know, right? Like, he's just basically stating the fact that this god comp is much better than anything else, which is true. Obviously. As he stated at the start of the video, the biggest issue is not the fact that like there's a meta, and it's not the fact that like some classes are OP. It's the fact that almost every single slot of that comp is much better than an alternative, right? And that's the biggest issue, right? Because we've had metas in the past, like Survival Hunter was really OP, Dastro Warlock was really OP, Fire Mage was really OP before in previous seasons and previous expansions. Rogue was really broken at some point. BM Hunter was really broken at some point. Moonkin was really broken at some point. Like, there have been times where other classes have been super OP, of course, right? Like, it's not a new thing. The problem this time around is exactly what Critcake is stating, is that even just changing one class from this god comp to something else is already like a downside, right? Even Moonkin, I would say, is like, inviting a Moonkin is like the next best thing after Mage, right? In my opinion. And even that is like a downside that you do notice, especially in certain dungeons where you have to kill totems quick or stuff like that. You just notice that you have less damage, right? Like, whenever I do bro mech on my Moonkin, I see those quaking totems live forever and we die. Or I do Vortex Pinnacle, we have less damage to the sparks. We do Brackenhide, we have less damage on the totem on the last boss, and the totems go off and we deplete, like stuff like that. It's not that Moonkin has bad damage, but the toolkit of the mage is just really insane, especially with the dungeons that we have this season as well. So even just changing the mage to a Moonkin is already noticeable. I don't think that you can't play Moonkin. Like, I think Moonkin is good, right? Like, I definitely think that it can get title easily as a Moonkin, right? But when you go to like the really high keys, then at some point you do really notice when you don't have the mage. And switching anything else is just like a nightmare. Like, if you switch the Augmentation Evoker out of your group setup, you do like three key levels less. Like, it's that bad. Like, you miss so much survivability all of a sudden if you don't have this Evoker in your group. Like, it's crazy. And if you remove the Shadow Priest, then all of a sudden some dungeons become really hard because you don't have the Master Spell, you don't have the PI boosting the other people's damage. And Shadow Priest, not only does Shadow Priest have PI, they also do really insane damage themselves. So it's like, it's kind of broken when you look at the overall damage if you include the PI damage as well. And then if you replace the Guardian Druid, all of a sudden you cannot do the same pulls anymore because tanks die while a Guardian Druid is just fine, right? Like, I played a lot with a Vengeance Demon Hunter because I play Moonkin, right? So we figured it makes sense to play Vengeance Moonkin, and then the rest of the comp was still the God comp. We just replaced the Guardian with the Vengeance, the Mage with the Moonkin, and I played a lot with this comp, and it was good. Like, we did manage to do some high keys, but we also depleted some high keys for numerous different reasons. And then I was pugging some keys with a Guardian Druid, and all of a sudden I was like, what the fuck? Like, I see the Guardian Druid just like pull 20 mobs, chain into another 10 mobs, just keep on chaining everything. The Guardian Druid is standing there, not giving a shit, you know, just standing still, tanking everything. And I'm like, what the fuck? So this is what you can do with a Guardian Druid? Like, what is happening? And then the Holy Paladin, of course, also just like such a big difference with defensives that they have available for the group. Sometimes if you don't have freedom, all of a sudden you're fucked, right? Like, if you have entangling and you don't have freedom, your tank has to move. Like, let's say, for example, last boss in Neltharion's lair, if the boss moves, you take a lot of damage, right? So you don't have freedom, your tank has to move out of entangling. All of a sudden you die because the boss is moving, like, just because you don't have freedom. And stuff like that. And then Paladin is also just like really tanky themselves. I mean, yeah, there are some things you can change around, right? I don't necessarily think that it's impossible to get title on an off-meta class. The most you can do is like switch one, right? Like, you need to keep the major pieces of this Exodia comp and then switch one class. So for this one off-meta spec to get title, right? Like, if you want to have title on a Warlock, you need to play Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Shadow Priest, Augmentation Invoker, Warlock, right? If you want to get title on, I don't know, like a Rest Shaman, you can probably do it if you keep the rest of the comp, the Exodia comp, right? And it just feels really bad if the whole comp is like set in stone, right? If it's only a bunch of specs that are OP, then it's usually not that big of a problem, right? Like, usually whenever we had Dastro Warlock Survival Hunter be so OP, then the third DPS could be anything at least, right? You should make a tier list what could replace Mage. I don't actually know, like, for me it's really hard to tell which other classes are able to replace a Mage because I never play with any other off-meta spec because I am the off-meta spec, right? I play Moonkin, which means we need a Shadow Priest and an Aug Evoker because I'm already replacing a meta spec. If we replace any other DPS outside of the Mage, then we're even more fucked than we already are, right? So I don't know. I cannot really make a tier list on how good the other off-meta specs are because I never play with them. I never play with Warlocks, I never play with Warriors or Melee or anything. I only ever play with Aug Evoker, Shadow Priest. This meta is still better than last 2 seasons of Shadowlands. It is not. Last 2 seasons of Shadowlands was just Dastro Warlock and Survival Hunter. The other things you could replace, right? And that was already bad, I agree. Like, Season 3, Season 4 Shadowlands was already bad. Not as bad as this, though. Like, to this day, I still don't understand. Because a big reason why Blood Decay was so broken was because of the Jailer weapon, right? And they were, like, the only tank that could really use it. I was like, why the hell do you not, like, nerf it or change it? Or, like, it was so dumb. Like, it was so stupid. And it's really weird because Blizzard has been kind of shitty at balancing and plus in the previous expansions, but they were actually really good in Dragonflight. Like, people might have forgotten about this because of the situation that we are in right now. Like, people might have forgotten about Season 1 and the start of Season 2, but Blizzard actually did some really good balancing for M+, at the start of, like, in Season 1. Because at the very start of Season 1, there was a little bit of a meta going on, with some classes being, like, more broken than others. And then they buffed and nerfed certain classes to pretty even out the meta. Like, I think season 1 Dragonflight was actually really good meta-wise. Like, it was actually really well done balancing-wise. And they continued to just change classes up throughout season 1 without having like a major impact onto the key levels that were doable and stuff. So they did a really good job. And they also did a pretty good job at the start of season 2 as well. And then this patch came out, and now it's fucked. Obviously, the major issue is the Aug Evoker. I think if Aug Evoker would not be a thing, then the rest of the meta would probably be a little bit more versatile, right? In my opinion. Because yes, of course, Guardian Druid is OP. Yes, of course, Holy Paladin's really good. Yes, of course, Shadow Priest is broken. Yeah. You know, like, that is all true. But I think if Aug Evoker was just not a thing, then I do think that more classes would be swapped depending on your comp. Like, you could probably play without a Guardian Druid, and then you play with another Druid instead to get Market of Wild, right? So you would maybe play with a Rasta Druid, or you play with a Moonkin. You keep the Shadow Priest, because Shadow Priest is broken. So you bring the Shadow Priest, and if Aug Evoker is not a thing, you can kind of put together a comp just fine. So I do think the main issue is the Augmentation Evoker, and I'm also not sure how they should actually fix it. I honestly don't know exactly what they could really do about it, because a lot of the issue with the Aug Evoker is their survivability that they give to the group. They have already nerfed it, right? They nerfed the Obsidian Scales Rallying Cry. Like, the problem is, even if they nerf more things, it's still better than having nothing, right? Like, any group survivability is gonna be strong, even if it's small. So it's like really hard to balance Aug Evoker. Like, the fact that it exists is the issue, right? Nah, I personally don't think the damage is the problem. I don't think so. Of course, the damage is really good that they give, but I honestly don't think that's the main issue. I think the main issue is the survivability to give. It's insane. Like, you don't know just how insane it is. Like, I did 27 keys before Aug Evoker came out in season 2. Like, before the patch, I did 27 keys on both Tyrannical and Fortified. And the difference in survivability whenever Evoker came out, like, it's unimaginable how broken it was. So noticeable. It was actually just insane. Like, I am convinced, I am 100% sure that it's the survivability that is the major issue with Aug Evoker. Like, you permanently get versatility, you constantly have another stamina buff, and then you get even more stamina whenever they use Obsidian Scales, which is a very low cooldown. Then they have a 20% AoE damage DR. They have Rescue with a shield if they want to give you the shield. They have an armor buff for the fucking tank. They give the healer more intellect, which makes the healer heal more. It's insane. Like, they give you so much ability. It's crazy. It's basically as if you have another healer. Like, no joke. It's actually as if you played with 2 healers. Like, it's insane. Why should they nerf it? Isn't it good that there will be always a support class in the future? I think they should add more to give variety in support classes. I personally am not against support classes, but there's a big issue in M+. It's 5-man content. There's only 5 players in M+. And if you reduce the slots for damage dealers to 2, let's say they add more support classes. That means that you now always have a support and you only have 2 damage dealers. You know how many damage dealer specs we have in the game? Like, there's so many. Imagine we could only fit 2 damage dealers into a group. Like, that'd be crazy. You would never get invited to anything anymore as a damage dealer. Tanks and healers, they don't have as big of a problem getting invited because there's less of them. Because in a raid, when you look at raiding, because M+ and raiding kind of go hand in hand. A lot of people do both, right? A lot of people raid and play M+. And in the raid, you only need 2 tanks, no matter the raid size. Like, even if you have a 30-man raid group, you only have 2 tanks, right? So the amount of tanks you need in raiding is very few, versus what you need in M+. And therefore, there's just less tanks, and they can easily get into groups. Usually. And healers is very similar. Like, you only need 4 healers in a raid, no matter well, you need a bit more in 30-man raid. But in a 20-man raid, you need 4 healers. But you need 14 damage dealers in a 20-man raid, right? And if in a plus you only need 2 from 14, if you compare this to tanks, you need 2 tanks for a raid, 1 tank form plus. In the raid, you need 14 damage dealers for a mythic raid, and if you 3 is already not enough, right? And you cannot reduce that to 2, otherwise you're fucked. So the only thing you could do is make it 6-man. You can make 6-man dungeons. So you have 3 damage dealers, 1 support, 1 healer, 1 tank. That, in my opinion, would be fine. But then you would also have to change the dungeons quite a lot. Like, you would have to figure out a way on how to, like, change the dungeons and how that would all work out. But then the other problem is, people say just add more support specs. Okay, how is that gonna work? Like, how can Blizzard just add more support specs? Like, in which time frame is this supposed to happen? Because I'm pretty sure they cannot make 10 more support specs within 2 weeks, right? So just adding more is a little bit of a... Like, you can't just say, oh, this is fine, they can add more in the future. Yeah, but when? In 5 years? Like, yes, that's a bit of a problem, I would say. Nothing wrong with 2-1-1-1 as the new MMO norm. I mean, I don't generally disagree with you. I don't think there's anything wrong with 2-1-1-1. Like, I don't think 2 DPS, 1 support, 1 healer, 1 tank is a problem, generally speaking. But not for World of Warcraft. For a new MMO, yes. When you create all of your specs and all of your classes around that rule set. But World of Warcraft already has 38 specs in the game. 38. And one of them is support. It's a bit of a problem. The thing, though, is... Like, I personally think it would have been really fine for Blizzard to add a support spec if they only wouldn't have given them survivability buffs. Like, I think Blizzard made a huge mistake when they gave Evoker survivability buffs. Because I think buffing other damage dealers as your main output would have been just fine. Like, I think if Evoker would only buff the damage dealers and not buff the healer and not buff the survivability of the tank or the group, then I think it would have been implementable just fine without any like super major issues, because at that point it's just about balancing. Yes, it's not super easy to balance a spec that only supports other classes. Of course, it's not really easy, but it's more doable than if you have a support class that not only buffs your damage dealers, but also your survivability and your healer. Like, that cannot be balanced. That's actually just completely imbalanceable. Even though you don't need an augmentation evoker for a plus 20 key, like you really don't. But if you have an augmentation evoker in your plus 20, then you can make quite a few mistakes and still be fine. Like, it basically makes up for your lack of like either experience or skill or whatever it may be, right? Inviting the quote-unquote meta classes is gonna make your key easier. Aug Evoker might not be super broken damage-wise on lower keys, but it's still just as broken survivability-wise on lower keys. And if you, let's say you don't interrupt a mob, you miss an interrupt, or you you pull something on accident, or you bolster a mob on accident, or you play a mechanic from the boss wrong or whatever, right? Having the Aug Evoker in a group might make up for the mistake. Like, maybe you currently had Obsidian Scales Rolling Cry up and you didn't die to that frontal that you get hit by because you have the Aug Evoker. If you didn't have it, you might have died, you know? Not as, like, it's not needed, right? For a 20 key. Nothing is needed for a 20 key. You can do a 20 key with anything you want. You can play a 20 key without a healer. You can play a 20 key with completely off-meta specs. You can play a 20 key with 2 tanks. But obviously, you know, you can make it harder on yourself or you can make it easier on yourself. But is the problem then the Aug Evoker or people in the plus 10 thinking they need to follow the meta? The problem is the Aug Evoker. Okay, so, because I hear this argument a lot. People sometimes say, oh, well, the community is the issue because they don't invite the other classes. And I'm all for inviting other things, right? Like, many times I sit here on my stream and tell people, if you do a 20, you don't need to invite this. You don't need to do this. Like, you just invite whatever, you know? Like, I keep telling that to people, but at the same time, you cannot just blame the community and then just like be, okay, well, it's the community's fault. Nothing we can do, you know? Because the thing is, the community cannot be changed. Like, even if every single content creator, even if every single streamer, every single YouTuber, everyone would sit here and tell people, hey guys, you should invite off meta comms. Like, you don't need meta comms for high keys. Like, even that would not help, right? Because the community as a whole gets influenced by the highest keys done, by what they see other people do. You cannot change the community's minds just like that. What you have to do is change the game. Like, that's the only thing you can do. The only thing Blizzard can do is change the game, right? Even if the community is wrong, in a sense. Like, even if the community does not need to invite an Augevoker for 20, or even if they don't need to invite a mage, it does not matter, right? It literally is irrelevant. Because you can't just blame the community and call it a day. It's like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. The community is wrong.